of how to do that, and hopefully look forward to a good discussion afterwards. I ran for Congress here in 2018, and partly to try and put some sanity back into our system in Washington, focus on healthcare. I see there's Richard Tripp, who's running this time again, and Patrick Henry, who's a former representative, trying again. So welcome, and delighted that you're here. My background is as a foreign policy expert. I started my career working in the United States Senate, then went to the National Security Council, then as one of the ambassadors at the United Nations, and then running a conflict prevention group, and then a conglomeration, sort of collaborative nonprofit that tried to promote a more engaged U.S. foreign policy on human rights, democracy, and climate change and non-proliferation. So I've followed this for a long time, these global trends. And I think we were over-complacent at the end of the Cold War. There's all these theories when we saw the Berlin Wall collapse after the 50 years of competition for global control. And looking back on it, I think we're a little too complacent. It's like, yay, democracy won, history's over, we don't have to worry about grand ideological battles today. And what we've seen is the democracies, yes, they have increased. Most of the former Soviet Union countries joined the Western world. Some of them are not democratic, but most of them are seeking to be. And we peaked at about half of the global economy being democratic, largely. There was a decrease in hate crimes, a sense that we would live together and focus on building our economies and our democracies. And if you look at the statistics of organizations that follow the current trends, there's been, over the last 13 years, a dramatic decline in democracy and governments that respect political rights and civil liberties and civil discourse. In the last period, right between the end of the Cold War and the next 20 years after that, the democracies declined 11%, and that trend is continuing. What we're seeing is a global rise in elected leaders who reject basic standards of human rights. You see countries that are challenging basic human rights, democracy, suppressing votes, and playing on fears across Europe, Hungary, Serbia, Nicaragua, all of countries throughout Africa, Uganda, Zimbabwe, are all doing that. And I would argue that we're also seeing a decline in equality treatment here. We heard from Gina on some of the LGBT issues. We've actually declined 8% in the global sort of freedom indexes over the last 8 years. We're number 86 out of the top 100, and we're now behind France, Germany, which is interesting from what you were just saying. We're now behind Germany and the United Kingdom. Harassment of religious groups are dramatically up. The biggest religion in the world is Christian, so naturally they're the most targeted. Out of the 193 countries in the world today, there's incidents of Christians being persecuted in 143 countries. That's almost all of them. Muslims are right behind that. Muslims are the second largest religion, and that's 140 countries have documented that, and that's on the rise. And then, as we heard from Rabbi Stone, anti-Semitism attacks are on the rise in 87 countries. So this is a global trend that we're seeing reflected to a certain extent in the United States. And Secretary of State Albright has just written a really interesting book on fascism, a warning that it's coming back globally. And in a recent forum, she was discussing that this is the most trying time for democracy since the 1930s. And that's only 75 years ago. So it's 3 generations, and that hate is coming back. Watching conflict prevention across the globe, it usually takes 2 generations before the bitter angers come back. And here we are 3 generations later with some of the same the same problems. And when you look at the rise in authoritarianism, there's kind of a playbook that you see across the globe. You discard mainstream politicians. Leaders are directly seeking to divide. You want political victory at all costs. And you have leaders that come to power that have a belief that greatness is only in their self, and therefore they must stay in power. And if you look across the globe, you see this in Turkey, in the Philippines, in Hungary, in Poland, in Brazil, in Egypt, and particularly in Russia, and to some extent in China. And if you look at the FBI reports, this is the 16th year rise in hate crimes here in the United States. So it's affecting us here as well. There's a great international organization called Human Rights Watch, which has basically does annual reports on the state of the human rights, calls for governments to let out political prisoners, stop torturing them, and I commend all their reports to all of you. And they have a great hashtag. It says "Call It Out" and text to 82257 because, as we heard from the other panelists, it's important to speak out when you see and report. Report it to your local FBI, report it to your local police. I think we should make it mandatory that state and local police do report hate crimes to the FBI, because the FBI needs the eyes and ears of the local population. We also need to build out a national call against hate speech and make it that it's not okay. Demand of our politicians to stand up to laws that minimize penalties for hate speech, that marginalize key parts of our society. And as I said, I'd spent most of my life in foreign policy, and I think it's Rabbi Stone's remembrance of the Holocaust 50 years ago now, I guess. It's important to remember that it's not ever a secret. And there are authors that have basically talked about 10 warning signs for genocide. And it starts early and it escalates as societies test how far they can go. So it's important to stand up early. First of all, there's classification, symbolization, discussing what's going on, and then there's organization, polarization. All of that prepares the marginalization of minorities and incites hatred among the population. And then becomes the preparation stage, and then becomes the persecution stage, and then we enter into extermination and then denial. And those are all your beautiful article goes through all of those signs, and we see them across the globe today, and even here in the United States. It's a trend that I never thought I would have to see in the United States. I've studied these signs, I worked in the middle of the Rwandan genocide and the genocide in Srebrenica, and seeing it over and over and over again, saying, what can we do? And I think what we should talk about as a group is what can we do? And I want everyone here to leave with a call to action, to stand up to hate. In the Rwandan genocide, for instance, the Hutus used a hate radio to incite violence against the Tutsis, which ended up literally letting almost 800,000 people be slashed to death by machetes. Srebrenica the same way, they were marginalizing the Bosnians. Now it's internet. And the internet is so much more powerful than radio or TV because it's instantly spreadable among all your friends. You don't have to sit and watch the radio or the TV. You can just click online and all of a sudden you're talking to millions. And so the call to action is all the more important to do that. And what I would suggest you take away here is think about how you are personally responsible for standing up to this hate and getting 10 of your friends. When you see something hateful, text it to, 82257 is hashtag call it out. Report it. Report the entity that is hosting this hate. I also think we need to make sure that we elect leaders that commit to standing up to hate. It's not a Democratic or Republican thing. It is an anti-hate thing. That challenge elected leaders to make sure that they will stand up to hate and sign on to bills that will change that. I think the fact that in Tallahassee they're not moving on some of these bills in the right direction is a call to action to put leaders in. I honestly don't care if they're Democrat or Republican. Put in leaders who are going to support the rights of our LGBT community, that are going to support the rights of those who challenge the hate as opposed to the other way. And I think there's a importance on all of us to vote. I am involved in efforts to register voters in the United States, across Florida, to make sure that we get out and vote and overcome some of the suppression of voting that's going on. Enjoy that, and join us in that. Make sure you leave here tonight with a pledge to register to vote, that you'll go and get 10 other people to register to vote, and talk to your friends and neighbors. I find that people just shut the door and don't talk. Reach out and say, well, what is a hate crime, and is this correct, and what should we do about it? Is this who we are as Americans? And in my life, this is the most challenging time to stand up to hate crimes, because we've seen it over and over and over again throughout history, and it's time that we say no. And it is important what happens in November. And again, this is not a partisan call, but we need to start electing leaders who are going to respect differences, respect the rights of minorities, and go into government and stand up for those. And I think that's what I want all of you tonight to take home with you is, yes, I will vote. Yes, I'll get 10 people to vote. And yes, I will get every elected official that I see as a candidate or in office and challenge them to stand up to this hate crime. Because if we don't stand up now, it will spiral, as we've seen it happen, not just in Nazi Germany, but in Rwanda. We're seeing it today among the Rohingya in Myanmar, in Burma. It's in every bit of people's human DNA to get triggered by those signals of hate. And we all, as Americans, have an obligation to stand up for it. So I hope you'll leave with that pledge and take action, and that we can continue to have this conversation. And thank you all for coming out tonight and joining us and trying to spread this message. And thank you again, Mark, for organizing it.